My name is Malaya Mount. I am a dietitian at Connecticut Children's and UConn. And today I'll be talking about label reading and food selection for a sugar-restricted diet. And I have no disclosures in relation to this talk. All right, so today we'll just go over an overview of kind of definitions of sugar. There's been so many kind of new artificial sweeteners, sugar alcohols, it keeps changing. So we'll go through some of those, talk a little bit about label review, some stuff that's come out in the media, and then a list of GSD-friendly sugars and the ones to avoid. These all look familiar, I'm sure. But just some names. So a lot of these sugars kind of fall under different categories. When you search them, they come up under all kinds of different things. So all of these names on the screen here, high-intensity sweeteners, non-caloric sweeteners, non-nutritive, so not nutritious, sugar substitutes, alternatives, and then just sugar-free items. So just to start basic, the natural sugars are found naturally in foods, mostly fruits, grains, and dairy. They are coming with fiber, with vitamins and minerals in their natural state. And then added sugars are added during the manufacturing process. For example, sugary cereals, and there's many more. So the sugar building blocks, again, maltose, sucrose, and lactose. So these are disaccharides, which means they're made up of two monosaccharides, two single simple sugars. And so this is just giving us a basis of kind of the rest of the talk and why certain ones are okay versus not okay. And so generally speaking, galactose and fructose are metabolized in the liver. So those are the ones that we pay more attention to, whereas glucose is readily available in the bloodstream. So to start out with artificial sweeteners, and again, we're kind of separating these different names that kind of the FDA and other authorities have categorized. And so artificial sweeteners are non-nutritive sweeteners. They're made synthetically or are from plants and fruits. A lot of times, they're naturally found sugars potentially in fruits, but then we learn from those and they're synthetically made, so they're not just extracted in like, for example, a sugar from figs. They're not just taking that sugar, they're really recreating it synthetically. And so artificial sweeteners, this number varies a little bit, but around 200 to 1,000 times sweeter than table sugar. And as a reminder, table sugar is 50% glucose and 50% fructose, which again is why we avoid that. So artificial sweeteners do not have sugar or calories, and the FDA currently has 6 approved artificial sweeteners. So ACE-K, Advantame, aspartame, which is a commonly known, neotame, saccharin, and sucralose. Those are mostly the colored packets that we're kind of used to seeing. Then there's another category that is now called novel sweeteners. 3, there's a typo there is 4. And these are generally recognized as safe by the FDA. And so these are also very commonly used right now. Stevia, monk fruit, I would say that one right now is in many, many, many new products. Thaumatin, and then allulose. And so again, you can see that these are coming from different fruits or naturally found in them, but again, when they're added to products, they're generally synthetically made and then added. To add a little more detail, for example, allulose, many times when you just Google it, it'll come up and say that it's the molecule is made very similar to fructose, but it actually is a little bit different. So that still is not being absorbed in the same way. It's going through the small intestine. It's not affecting blood sugar, and so it is okay to have. Sugar alcohols is yet another category, also created synthetically. And these are, again, used to sweeten food for lower calories. That's what all of these are used for. These are not as sweet as artificial sweeteners. So sugar alcohols are less sweet than table sugar, or around that amount. So you can see the list here. I've put a couple of notes on the right. For example, sorbitol is metabolized as fructose, so that is one that we avoid, and I'll have a list with a QR code that you can just click on that separates these all together. And then a lot of these, I'm actually going to move to the next slide. Some cavity protective qualities, that's the benefits we look at. But truly all of these, when consumed in excess, really have GI effects. So the alcohols end in "-all". That's how you can tell that they're sugar alcohols versus artificial sweeteners. You can see all of these are ending in "-ol" or have "-ol" in them. And so, again, they're kind of going through, they're only partially absorbed in the small intestine, and then they're going all the way through to the large intestine undigested. And so that's the reason that they're not affecting blood sugar, is that they're not following that same absorption process. Sugar alcohols, different than artificial sweeteners, do have some effect on blood sugar. Sorry, so let me recap. Artificial sweeteners are going all the way through undigested. Sugar alcohols are partially absorbed. That is the reason that we say that about 50% of them are affecting your blood sugar. So the media, I don't know if anyone's seen all these articles coming out talking about how you should be very cautious about artificial sweeteners or certain products that are having higher risk of effect on the gut, of effect on cardiovascular disease. These are just a couple of the headlines that have recently come out. I will say that overall the takeaways, I mean, there's many, many articles like that. Some are looking at mouse models, some are in humans, so there's really a varying degree of the population that they're looked at and where those headlines are coming from. So overall, these sweeteners are all deemed safe. And so there's mixed results on the media and on these headlines. I think they cause a bit of a fear factor. So kind of all of the articles that are about weight, metabolic health, there really is mixed results. And so at the end of the day, they always say, well, we need more information to make this claim. Also linked to cancer, some of these headlines are touching on that. This is only observational human studies. They're also mixed results. They are deemed safe by the EU and the US regulatory agencies. And so this is talking about artificial sweeteners and sugar alcohols. Saccharin and sucralose, and I think there's going to be more and more articles coming out about the effects on the gut. So we know that those alter the microbiome, mostly in a negative way. And so what do we do with all this information? Really enjoy and use them when they're needed, but really to continue to focus on whole foods. And I think this is a big push, not just for GSD. There's a lot of kind of, healthy people, diabetes, all these new products are containing these. And so there's a really big market, and I think a lot of people are consuming them, so I'm not trying to scare you away from them, but just kind of when we look at all this, they're newer, they do affect the gut, and they have their place, but not needed all the time. A little bit more information. The World Health Organization actually put out a document in 2023 summarizing their recommendations around these sweeteners. They made kind of a statement about the receptors. I think a lot of people think, again, kind of broader population, not GSD, about these sweeteners and say, oh, it's a, no calories, kind of think about its relation to weight. And so they were doing some studies and know that it's not just your mouth that has those receptors. They're really looking at the whole body and knowing that there is an effect on the GI tract, the brain, the pancreas, your adipose tissue. And so they actually don't recommend kind of switching or moving everything to artificial sweeteners, particularly in the space of kind of weight. And so the published information, again, some of this is just definitions, and then we'll talk more about foods and labels. But just the published information on GSD and sugars is this paper from 2014. And it states, as a result of the deficiency of G6Pase enzyme, fructose and galactose are not metabolized to G6P, which further contributes to the biochemical abnormalities. And goes on to say there's no consensus regarding the restriction of these, but sucrose, fructose and glucose, and lactose, galactose and glucose are often limited or avoided. So I'm just noting this because there's many different sites here, and your team may have given you specific numbers, and they may vary from a couple numbers that I put up. And so that's okay. There's no real consensus on kind of strict amounts, but I will share mine today. All right, so just a little label review. Again, kind of everyone's used to looking at serving sizes and carbohydrates, and then more recently, added sugars were listed onto this nutrition facts label. But when we're looking at artificial sweeteners and sugar alcohols, artificial sweeteners are not listed on the nutrition facts. You really have to look at the ingredient list to see what's in there. And again, part of this reason is that they're not affecting kind of the carbohydrate amount in that food. Sugar alcohols, in terms of the labeling laws, they can be voluntarily listed, and I'll show you some images after this, on the nutrition facts, but they don't have to be. And so they also may just be listed by name under the ingredients. Okay, so a couple products with artificial sweeteners. Again, the nutrition facts looks very similar to any other product. Sorry, it's a little bit small, but it kind of says sugars 0 for this Jell-O example. But when you go to the ingredients list, you'll see the exact artificial sweeteners that are actually in the product. Same thing with the whole wheat English muffins, which you would look at this product and say maybe there's nothing added to it, but that is not the case. It has sucralose, again, in the ingredient list. So kind of getting used to looking at the list of names to really identify what's in the product. They're getting sneaky. Sugar alcohols, again, this 0 sugar icing on the left, they've chosen to list sugar alcohols on their nutrition facts label, and they've also listed it in the ingredients. And so there's 2 locations. It's a little easier to tell that that one contains sugar alcohol. And also the Clio bars on the right, same thing. They've listed it on the nutrition facts label and then also told you what sugar alcohols are being used. So this is our site's recommendations. Less than 5 grams of sugar per meal and less than 2.5 grams per snack. Again, when we're talking about artificial sweeteners, this wouldn't fall into this, it wouldn't add up and contribute to this 5 and 2.5, but sugar alcohols would, 50% of them. Just a couple more examples here. Again, these are all GSD-friendly foods that are listed up here, but they do contain some of these sweeteners. I also had some families send over some snacks that they're recently using, so this slide is just an image of those. And then I'm gonna talk a little bit, I had some families share some recipes that they've been making at home using some of these sweeteners or some of these alternatives. And so I'm just gonna point out here many of these recipes, and I also have a QR code with a list of these recipes. Many of them are using almond or coconut flour. And so just to point out, the reason for that is the lower carb amount. You can see here per quarter cup of almond flour versus all-purpose flour. Carbohydrates are significantly lower in almond flour at 6 grams per quarter cup versus the 24. So I'll briefly go through some of these, and again, there's a code at the end containing all of these recipes. I always had high hopes that I would try these all out, but I will say the ones listed here, my families have tried, and so this comes from them. So you can see kind of bread recipes, etc., but these are all containing some type of sweetener. Many of the recipes will suggest a certain one. Again, they kind of react in water and moisture and baking in different ways. Or they'll just say kind of your choice of alternative sweetener. You can also see in the nutrition facts here, they're all much lower in carbohydrate than they would be if they were commercially purchased. And then pizza, of course. So I only added this slide because I keep getting 3-day food diaries from my lovely patients, and they still love pizza and are eating it, which is okay. But there's ways to make it lower carb, kind of lower sugar. Marinara sauce is often in pizza sauce, containing a lot of sugar. I mean, the ones on the shelves have added sugar to them. So these are just some ways to kind of add in some veggies, lower the sugar, and still be able to eat the food that you love. There's a number of websites that do have good lower sugar, lower carb recipes. And then I'm also going to address lactose a little bit. I know some people kind of have dairy, some don't, some are still scared of it because they think they can't have it, so that's the reason of just adding this in a little bit. So again, lactose contains galactose and glucose. There's an enzyme that we have in our body that kind of converts this process. Lactose is not labeled specifically on a nutrition label, but it is included in the carbohydrates and sugar when you're reading a label. And then just some information from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, because people are always thinking, okay, hard cheeses are okay, but maybe that's a general conception that it has lower lactose when they're kind of those sharp cheeses, et cetera. But this just gives an outline kind of what is considered low lactose. And I have a list here on the next page, kind of telling you amounts and then in comparison the amount of lactose. Again, dairy is okay to have. It does contain galactose, but you're also getting a lot of benefits from dairy. You're getting vitamin D, you're getting calcium, and those are two things that we really need for healthy bones. There are non-dairy sources of calcium, but really the conversion is different. So you're not getting as much calcium from these, and they kind of convert in your body in our even lower amount. So I do think dairy is good to have in smaller amounts. I think it's also good to include these items, but if you're not meeting your needs, then you're really using supplementation as well. Back to just this image to give us a basis of why the next slide is separated the way that it is. So this is really just an easy guide to have and refer to. Again, the reason that these are categorized this way is because of those disaccharides that are made up of the single sugars. And I've put in the purple boxes just all of the items that fall into that category. Again, the artificial sweeteners, the sugar alcohols. Note, sorbitol is not on the OK list. That is because it's metabolized as fructose. That's the only exception. And then again, even though these are okay to have, they should still be had in moderation in smaller amounts. As we remember, 200 to 1,000 times sweeter than table sugar. So they're already only needed in small amounts. But again, the products that they're in as well, I think the biggest thing to remember is really GI distress, stomach upset. If that's happening all the time and you're consuming these foods a lot, there's likely a correlation there. And so just being aware of that. This is just a QR code for a PDF of that last slide. I'll leave it up for a moment, and then there's another one for the recipes. So really the big takeaways here, there are so many new products I'm sure you've seen. There's new keto products, there's new sugar-free products, and that's gonna keep changing, and they're likely gonna keep coming up with these new novel sweeteners, as we call them. So more names are gonna start coming up in the coming years. So really check your labels, see what they're using in there. Opt for whole foods when you can. I mean, there was many recipes for cookies on there, I fully acknowledge, and it's okay to use those when the time is right. And alternative sweeteners really do have a place, but again, just being aware of the volumes and frequency that you're having. Any questions? Yes. So those are don't. I think you're referring to the slide that I wrote allulose on. And so allulose, I was just acknowledging if you were to Google that and read about it, it would tell you that they come from those items, which we generally say avoid. But the reason I was writing that is allulose, when it's added to products, is actually made synthetically. And so it's not broken down in the same way. So it is okay to have allulose and those novel sweeteners. But right, the fruits we really do avoid for the most part. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yeah.
Because of the dietary needs on that, I have higher protein needs within my diet, but at times I see that the carbs raise a little bit, and even sometimes the sugars on that. Is there an offset that way, or because I take higher protein enriched?
Let me clarify the question. Because you have more protein, is that kind of offsetting some additional sugars? Is that correct? I would say no. Okay. Sorry. I love the more protein. I think we all probably need a little bit more protein. But no, I mean, when you think about the way that our body is utilizing those, you're still, I mean, the artificial sweeteners, et cetera, are another case, but kind of the carbohydrates and sugar intake, your body's still metabolizing those, whether there's protein there or not. And whether, if you're eating them at the same time versus separate, I mean, there's some influence on blood sugar, whether they're together or not, but they're still existing. I think that's a good point. Some people ask about net carbohydrates, and that's kind of subtracting fiber and, same concept about the other things that you're taking in with your sugar. I don't counsel on using net carbohydrates. I look at the total carbohydrates and go with that. I love if there's fiber in there, that's wonderful, and we should be using those items, but the carbohydrates are still there.
Any other questions? Thank you. Sorry, I'm sorry.
I don't need the microphone. I'm just going to ask if you can go back to the recipes.
Oh, yes, sure.
Okay.
The QR code?
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
So this might be a general question, but are the labels that are presented for nutrition facts, I know for most of the American branded products, they're mostly up to date. They are supposed to be accurate. How would you rate the accuracy of them in general? And maybe more as far as like imported products, let's say.
That is a great question. I don't know if I have a true solid answer for you, but really they should be up to date. I don't have on the top of my head what the US regulation is in terms of how quickly they need to change, but it really should be very reflective. I know that there is, I believe, a 10%, and I could be wrong, I'll have to look this up for you, but variation. For example, if it says a serving is X amount of grams and it contains this many calories, they're allowed to have kind of a 10% flex there, and so it isn't always perfect. But in terms of updating, I mean, I would like to think that they should always be very up to date, but I will have to look into that for you.
Okay, the reason I ask is because I've seen imported products which claim to have 0 grams of sugar. We don't know for sure, but
Gotcha. Okay. I do know, I think really with so much kind of attention on all of these sweetener options, I really would find those to be quite accurate in terms of what the product's containing and really the sugar and carbohydrate amounts.
Okay.
But we all know everything's not perfect, so.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you.